lightning talk this morning, we're going to have Kuhn Perrin, also from Deloitte. We'll talk about public health and preparedness.
Thank you. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm Kuhn Perrin. I'm from Deloitte, and I'm hoping to talk to you guys just for a couple minutes today about how do we improve accountability in the public health preparedness and response space. So I don't know about you guys, but after the Ebola outbreak, I found myself wondering, are we really ready as a nation, and are we really able to, if another event occurs, are we really able to respond in a way that's meaningful and makes a difference? So next slide, please. Or do we have oh, here we go. So before I jump into the agenda and talk a little bit through the project that I've recently been working on in this space, I think it's important to add a little bit of context because it's a very complex environment, public health preparedness and responses. So one of the biggest challenges with preparedness and response is success is really measured when nothing happens. And so really the ideal state of a response is that no outbreak happens, no natural disaster happens, and kind of a secondary success is if something does happen and we actually manage it well, so the Ebola example that I gave. So that's kind of the first and foremost complex challenge in this space, is that that's very difficult to measure. Two other things come to mind in this space that I want to share with you as well, is that recently there's been a number of increased threats, so as mentioned, Ebola, but also other things such as bioterrorism, synthetic biology, so people getting bad bugs and trying to manipulate them for evil. Other things such as globalization and how it affects emerging infectious disease, and things even such as measles resurgence and polio. In addition to that, antimicrobial resistance is a big challenge right now, with people taking more and more drugs, and the bugs are getting stronger and harder to kill. So these are just some of the challenges in the preparedness and response space that my client faces on a daily basis. So trying to figure out how to combat all these challenges. In addition to increased threats, there's also been declined funding recently. So the top of the funding was really after September 11th, and there's a lot of money put into this space. And ever since then, there's been almost year-over-year decline. And even the $600 million there that you see is the past 5 years, an average decline in funding. And while it's still a very large portfolio, so $1.3 billion is invested every year in this space, there's a lot of work still to be done, and it's, again, increasing challenges with declined funding. So all these three things combined, so complex environment, increased threats, and declined funding, has led CDC leadership, in addition to just government in general, to take a look and say, okay, how do we better account for this? And how do we make sure we're, one, where we need to be, and two, where we want to go? So in addition to the previous challenges I mentioned, one thing that specific challenges that my client has faced is this has been done in the past. So people have tried to look at this and measure the preparedness space in the past. And again, it's very challenging to do. So as you'll see on the left side, a lot of those inputs are probably terms you are familiar with, like GIPRA. Some of you may have heard of FEP, which is a large amount of money that goes out to state and local health departments to try to build capability and capacity. But all of the things on the left, all of those inputs, in one way or another, really try to get at measuring preparedness and measuring capabilities across the landscape. And really, ideally, to drive results in that middle space of outcomes. So to have strong measures, to have strong results planning-oriented processes, and really, at the end of the day, to have a more impacted focus on return on investment for that $1.3 billion that's invested. So the ideal result is to have a convincing story that folks can tell both Congress and the taxpayers and anyone who wants to know is, are we ready, and what are we doing with the funds that are spent in this space? So to address these issues, again, like I mentioned, I work for Deloitte, and CDC hired us to try to think through some of this high-level strategy of how to approach this very challenging topic that, again, has been approached in the past. So what are we going to do differently that's going to change the way the outcome of this? So the three kind of tenets of the project are, one, to strengthen the current measurement that's done, because there's a lot of good measurement done at the CDC. So how do we agree on existing measures that make sense, and then identify gaps and other measures that maybe they're not currently measuring that they should be. Second, to better reflect relationship between what our legislative body and the money that's coming down from Congress, what's being told to them, and also what's being told down to the divisions in the center, and again to the state and local health departments. So to be able to coordinate across all of that to make sure it's one coherent story that makes sense in the space. And then lastly, and certainly not least importantly, is kind of the more tactical piece is how do you implement this and how do you make it a process that's lasting? And I think that's really where other past efforts have failed, is in that where that rubber meets the road. So a lot of good work is often done in government that then sits on a shelf and collects dust. And so we really want to try to change that cycle and make this something that's usable for the CDC, not only in the preparedness and response space, but maybe elsewhere as well. So this is kind of our methodology was driven by a portfolio management approach. So this is just a quick snapshot of kind of the complexity of the organization. And really the takeaway here is, as you can see on the left, there's 4 divisions within the Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response. They all do very different things. So Division of Emergency Operations is what you think of as command and control center, kind of the response arm of the organization. Division of Select Agents and Toxins is really the regulatory body for the organization. State and local readiness, as I mentioned, is the main effort there is trying to build out state and local capacity across 15 capabilities in the space. So they do a lot of important work at the local level. And then Strategic National Stockpile is really where all of the medical countermeasures are housed all across the United States and in secret locations. So if an event does occur, that we can get to the medicine and the medical countermeasures that we need. So they all do very different things, but the whole point of this project and this program of measurement is to try to tell a coherent story across the whole space of how do we respond to events and how do we do it well. So one of the things, like I mentioned, that we saw that failed in the past is really the adoption of whatever tool that CDC and specifically OPHPR used to better manage their portfolio. So what we looked at was what were their pain points in the past, and really most of them relied around usability of the tool, so whatever that tool may be, and a lot of the complaints we heard were things were often complex and people didn't know how to use them, or you had to go to training in order to understand the graphics or the visualization behind the work. And that's one of the critical pieces that we looked at when trying to take the outcome measures that we developed with Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response and visualizing that important data so that leaders can make decisions to make informed investments. And so that's one of the main reasons we partner with Socrata, because as many of you know, it's a very clean design and it's very intuitive to the user. And it's something that, you know, when you look at it, it overlays across a lot of different platforms. And so one of the things we looked at was design strategy, so developing a dashboard that people want to use, and then also customer strategy, so it's something that they're able to use, again, that's intuitive and easy for the user. So this is just a quick snapshot of it's still in progress. This took us about 6 weeks working with the Socrata team, but on the left side is kind of a higher page for leadership to be able to look at and see the health of their organization. And then if you want to find out more, and this will eventually be made public, but not yet, but you can find out more about how the measure is working and like user success stories and hopefully videos and other kind of deeper dive information that may be critical to maybe a project officer or somebody that wants to know more about that particular measure. So in summary, the big issue is that there's a $1.3 billion preparedness portfolio that wasn't holding others accountable as well as it could be, and also leadership wasn't able to look across the space and make informed decisions because they didn't have a way to do so. So the solution was we developed a clean and usable leadership dashboard that the whole entire organization can use to make critical decisions for investments in this space. And really, the impact of that is now leaders can look across and we can tell Congress, we can tell the taxpayer, and whoever really wants to know is, one, how capable are we to respond to a future threat, and then two, how are we holding others accountable? Thank you.